Welcome to Casual Conversations. Hi, Hope. How are you doing out in the UK?
Catherine, yeah, I'm good, thank you. Happy to be here.
And today, I'm very excited to have our guest, Akudo from the UK. How are you doing today?
Very well. I'm really glad to be here. Really honored to be joining this casual conversation.
We're very happy to have you. Hope and I have had the chance to meet you about a month ago through Zoom and had such a great time talking to you. We asked you to come on the show. So we usually start the show with a little bit about you and where you were born and early childhood and if you were interested in science. So do you want to share a little bit about your first years?
Okay, so like I said, I'm really honored and humbled to be here because every time I meet with you, Catherine, I learn so much about brain injury, and then I wonder, how do you find the time to do all the things you do? So you've just talked about your both now. I'm like, this is really incredible. So
ADHD.
It's an honor. Sorry?
ADHD. That's how I just keep moving. But
so it really is an honor to be here, and to be. I can see Jane Etheridge to be, in a company of great women. Hope, Kent. Really honored to be here. So my childhood, I grew up in a home where there was lots of love. My mom was a head teacher, so she's the one who is always looking through your work to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And I was privileged to come from a family where my siblings, well, high achievers, but there's so much love and warmth, and ease is the word I would use, because I just spent the week with my sister, who is the CEO of a bank, and last week, and ease with which we just transition through life, through different phases, everyone supporting each other. I kind of think that they didn't set me up for adulthood, because suddenly you've had this wonderful childhood and then you come into adulthood and you have to deal with bills and education and children and all of that. But my early years were really interesting. I learned quite a lot from that: faith, community, family, the fact that we're one together. That was the childhood I had. Really enjoyed growing up.
did you find an interest in science right off the bat, or when did science enter your world?
Well, I how I grew up in Nigeria, and so when you're categorized according to ability, so they say, okay, you should go into sciences and all of that. But I would see myself as a social scientist. So I like science, but I am the one who would say, oh, you have a condition, for instance, but let's not look at the condition. Let's look at other things. What's disabling the person? Is this condition, or is there social isolation? So I'll give an example, which I'll refer to later on. I worked with a young person who had craniopharyngioma, which is a type of brain tumor. And he had word-finding difficulties. One optic nerve was damaged in one eye because he had about 3 brain injuries. And so there were issues around that, memory loss and all of that. But there were also issues around social isolation. So he comes from a migrant family, South Asian high-functioning migrant family. So if we're treating the condition by itself, you've missed a trick to look at other factors affecting the person. So there's social isolation, there's the language barrier, access to services, access to support. So that's why I would say I'm a social scientist. I'd like to work with people holistically to say, okay, what else is disabling the person? Is it just the condition? Is it the illness? Or are there other things that the society is putting up as barriers to the person's health? For instance, I live in the UK and people have to access benefits. So if people have to go through the whole application process and have a brain injury, how do we set up those forms? How do we expect people to fill forms when it's difficult? When they have word processing difficulty, when they have memory loss or attention span. And Catherine, you talked about looking at the time frame for these conversations. That's automatically looking at attention span for people. So the thoughtfulness that goes into what we do, that is why I would say, okay, I'd like to look at other issues, not just the science. Yeah.
So it's really, you were really, the part about being a social worker is really, really baked in, which is, I think, kind of interesting. I think, being a social worker, I don't think people go into it for fame or fortune. It's just sort of a calling, and I think a viewpoint of how you meet people. So did you go to school in the UK, or did you go to the school in Nigeria?
Oh, I went to school in Nigeria initially. So I did my first degree in Nigeria. Then I did a first master's in early years. So I worked with children and families, children with autism, all kinds of disabilities. So I'm a qualified early years professional. Then I also did a master's in social work. And so that's why I'm also a qualified social worker. Both master's degrees are in the UK.
Did you see a difference? And I'm always interested across countries. Was there a view of social work in Nigeria that contrasted or was similar to the view of how social work works in the UK?
Well, with Nigeria, we look at social work from a non-governmental perspective. So we're looking at NGOs and charities, charitable organizations supporting children in orphanages. And it's mainly within religious framework. So a church can decide, okay, would like to have an arm to look after the less privileged children who come from very poor backgrounds. But the difference with that in the UK is that social work is statutory. So you're an extended arm of the government. So you're working with the legislative framework. And that's the main difference. So a lot of people come from Africa and different parts of the world and come into social work expecting that we're just going to be do-gooders, helping people, which is what we do. So like today, I've interviewed a lot of about 3 or 4 applicants who want to study social work, and everyone says, oh, I'd like to help people. But in the UK, it goes beyond just wanting to help people. So there are different skills that you would require. You would have analytical skills, you have the ability to think on your feet, crisis management, being person-centered. Emotional intelligence is actually quite key. And then understanding legislation and knowing how to navigate your way when it can be challenging and very dilemmatic, I would say, because you want to help people, but there are barriers that are put in place already by the structure of the society. So that's the difference between social work in Nigeria and in the UK. So it's more structured here, but with the degree that you have here, you can practice in America, in Canada, in South Africa. So I have a friend, for instance, who is working here as a social worker, but she's also working in Lebanon. So she has 2 jobs. And then I have a dual role within the university. So I'm a social work lecturer, but I'm also a researcher. So I do brain injury research. So that's what I like, the versatility that social work offers.
And then just one more question to compare. Just in generally, culturally, Nigerian society, do people view social workers as kind of interlopers in their world, or helpers, or are there barriers culturally to reaching out from helps from social workers in Nigeria versus the UK?
That's a really good question. The community, the society is very communal, whereas in the UK it's very individualistic. So if we have a need, if I need money, for instance, I'm going to think, first of all, I hope my husband is not on this call, but ask my husband first, my sister, my brother. So that's how we operate. Then you have the extended family, your cousins, and then you go to maybe your church, your uncles, aunties. But in the UK, it's very individualistic. So you're responsible for your own welfare and well-being. So that's the main difference. So culturally, before you would access social services, people would tend to think, oh, there's really something wrong, because we tend to help each other. So it takes a village to raise a child. So your neighbor can speak to you and say, oh, why have you done this? Why? Or correct your child, actually. But in the UK, you might not even know who your next door neighbor is.
And you, I'm getting a lovely collection of wonderful women that I am, and they all happen to come from Nigeria. And just the warmth and the connection. Nneka McGregor in Canada, Women in the Center, and she's been on the show. She is from Nigeria through the UK to Canada. And you know, that community culture and that warmth really comes through. So you came to the UK, you did your 2 degrees, and then tell me what was the piece that, you know, what connected? Was it that client that connected you to brain injury or something in particular?
So I talked about the boy that I worked with, and I'm really glad that Jane is here, because when I worked with this boy, it was as a student on placement. And he was in a school where his teachers didn't even know he had a brain injury. So he had been assigned to a colleague of mine who closed his case because he didn't attend appointments. And I thought, why should we close this person's case? Because he missed appointments. And so I asked for his file, opened it. And the first thing I saw was he would not necessarily ask for help because he has memory issues and all of that. And so I started working with him, and I contacted a few charities that work with people with brain injury. It was a Medway where Jane works also. And Jane was one of the charities that supported her. And when I spoke to Katherine before, I said, Jane is someone who I know that at personal cost to herself would support people. And so one of the things we did was that we brought 3 people into the university, because at that time, the university where I studied did not have brain injury in the curriculum. And I thought brain injury is a leading cause of death and disability in the UK for people aged 0 to 40. It should be in the curriculum. Social workers should know about brain injuries. I have classmates who would go into settings, you know, we call them placements in the UK. In America, they're called clinicals. So social work students would go for their clinicals and meet people with brain injury and wouldn't know what to do. So one of the things I did was Jane and I organized a session at the university where we had 3 people with brain injury. One, if I remember correctly, has a PhD in nuclear physics. One was a construction manager, and the third person was a submarine engineer. And they share their experiences with my other classmates. And I think that experience has then led me further down, because I then contacted other researchers in brain injury who, when I graduated, said, okay, there's a research group of academics who are interested in brain injury. And that's how, you know, I think it's been a privilege to now work with people that I used to study and refer to when I was studying. So I'm usually starstruck in meetings when people like Mark Holloway, for instance, or Professor Andrew Bateman, who I work with closely now, when they're talking, I still can't believe that I'm talking to them. But most importantly is the impact that we make on people's lives. So again, like Jane, who, when I was talking to you, I said, Jane would probably say, no, I don't do anything. But at great personal cost, you can see that in times of ill health, no matter what the barrier is, you'd hear her say, oh, but I just need to support someone else. Or there's someone who has a need somewhere, and I need to think about I can't go myself maybe because of the lockdown, but I really, really want to help her. And so that has, you know, I wrote, Jane, did I ever tell you, because she's on this call, that I wrote my dissertation on the role of the third sector in supporting people with brain injury? And that's because, did I call Jane? She was really ill, but she was still thinking about somebody else. And the third sector is charities, how they offer specialist services that they sit between the government, the private sector, and the government. Yeah.
Jane, do you want to say anything?
I was about to ask.
You can call out Jane. Jane, if you want to turn your mic on and say hi.
Can you hear me now? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Yes. firstly, I really feel that I don't deserve to be here, and I don't do as much as I really want to. I am a volunteer, and I was brought into working with people with brain injury, mainly because my son suffered a brain injury, a severe traumatic brain injury in South Africa. So not only was he, had this severe traumatic brain injury, where I was being telephoned to say, come over if you can, and it's unlikely that he will survive it. But he did survive it. So I sort of managed to get over there, and I don't know how I did, but at the time I was a councillor, an elected representative on Medway Council, and I chaired the health and community. So I've always had an interest in health and community, but I also got to know mainly through the problems of bringing my own son and integrating him into some sort of pathway over in the UK. That so many other people, and I was somebody that actually understood the system as much as anything, I'd never considered myself an expert, and I don't think there's really any huge experts. I'm not saying there aren't experts but in brain injury, because they're all so different, and everybody is different to start off with, and it doesn't matter how frequently you sort of talk to one person, you talk to somebody else, and they might have some of the issues. So there's similarities in their brain injuries, but equally there's so many things that set them apart in how they actually handle it and the support around them. And I've obviously seen things from a carer's point of view. My son did survive. I brought him over. I consider him the walking wounded. He doesn't mind me talking about him, otherwise I wouldn't, because I think he feels that if it makes it better, the understanding that other people might have about what it's like to actually have a brain injury or be somebody that's had to live with somebody that's had a brain injury. It meant him leaving his family. So his wife, although they'd just got divorced whilst he was over there, he had a young son, and his wife has been actually amazing, in keeping connected with us and with his son and everything else. But it's all these sorts of things that also affect how somebody feels inside. And so, for instance, one of the problems that I had recently, I'm going on about my son rather than the people, if you like, but my son had difficulties getting a doctor's appointment. So something simple like that. And of course, we've got COVID, and I'd gone away. I've had bowel cancer, which I've come to my 2 years, hopefully this week, when I shall be clear for 2 years. So, but in all that sort of time, I ended up going and staying with my daughter, who was also living abroad, after I'd had my chemotherapy. My son was here, and although he wasn't on his own, he obviously felt on his own. And when he was trying to get a doctor's appointment, and they kept saying to him, ring up at 8 o'clock for an appointment. That was the system that they had. And everybody had to ring at 8 and get in the queue until there wasn't any appointments. And then they just cut you off, and then they'd say, ring up the next day or whatever. And he kept ringing, saying, I can't call you at 8 o'clock. That's why I need to see the doctor. And it turns out eventually he was sort of excommunicated is the word that I use from his GP, because he ended up getting so cross. He went round there, didn't explain himself very well, said in an email, for instance, I'm going to court and then I'll be up and I want to see the doctor. And somebody obviously understood that, who was at the other end of this email, that perhaps my son had been to court for something that he'd done wrong, which wasn't the case. He was there as a witness, but they've made up their mind about him and ended up sort of calling the police on it because they wouldn't let him into the surgery. And it got so stressful for him that, you know, he literally didn't know which way to turn. And there was other stuff going on. But it was just giving a little insight into somebody's life that appears normal, whatever normal is, appears like us, walks okay, you know, and everything else, but cannot make himself understood enough to be for somebody else to actually put themselves in his situation. And in fact, I've also been doing some studying recently and on hidden disabilities, because one of these people that went along to the university, what Akudo is referring to, when they were waiting at the university, went in for something to eat or drink. This person had Parkinson's, and when they took out their straw, the person that was serving or waitressing in the student, you know, quarters or whatever, started laughing at this person, which, because this person also had a brain injury and also had, you know, other complications, felt so let down and so, what's the word, you know, felt so alone and angry about everything, started saying, I want to raise awareness about hidden disabilities. And therefore, what's ended up happening is the local college is now laying on a course. It's taken some while, but is laying on a course where people are being taught about hidden disabilities. I mean, generally, to cut the story short, it's about how you should treat anybody in service and giving somebody respect. But
I just want to jump in with the point you had made earlier about when people with brain injury end up having disconnects and communication issues with people in the community, and then the police end up getting involved. And in this country, depending on your skin color and socioeconomic, that can have fatal consequences or a pathway to prison. And the other piece that you're talking about is hidden disabilities. I think it's in Canada that they have a lanyard that has sunflowers on it. I know there's also some airports that have a hidden, you know, some sort of symbol. There's also cards, and a couple of different countries have cards that, you know, you can hold up and say, I have a brain injury.
We do that here. The lanyard is well used and everything else. And I think partly, particularly young males, they also feel that by putting something around their neck and also say, I'm a vulnerable person, doesn't always play well into how they feel.
Yeah, no. And being the mom of 3 boys, I do know that, you know, that they don't like that. And just to connect to Akudo, that, you know, if you can't wear a lanyard, if you don't have a card, if you don't, it's that social work piece that I feel like that you're trying to interpret the situation for the person with the brain injury, and then trying to interpret the situation for the person on the other end. And at social work school, we certainly didn't have discussions on brain injury. I've actually gone back to Fordham and given talks. And I look when I see them on a lot of lists for social work topics that go by, and I've never seen a brain injury one. So this idea about bringing social work in to help us with these situations, that was, sort of your thought process, right? As you saw what you could do at the university.
Absolutely.
For me, it didn't make any sense whatsoever that somebody perhaps gets a few weeks of rehabilitation, is then sent out into wherever, their community, perhaps isn't reacting in the same way that they may have done before, and is expected to just be able to exist. Akudo was also talking earlier about the family life in Nigeria, as opposed to how things are done in this country. And I have to say, even my own family, I found really difficult. I don't know if you've ever heard of this saying, but it goes along this: you don't want to do that, you want to do this. You don't want to do that. Why are you doing that? Do this, don't do that. Do it this way. Why are you treating this person like this? There's nothing wrong with them. So it's for all of these reasons that the people are so frustrated. But I did start up the Medway with other people, not on my own, just with a group of people that I persuaded to help me, because I can't do it on my own, and also other solicitors and therapists were involved at the time, and also somebody from Heathway UK. So we've got Heathway UK here. I don't know if you know about Heathway UK. Got wonderful sort of library about brain injury.
Actually, I had lunch with Peter.
Oh, did you?
A couple of years ago, and I talked about being a virtual organization, and he talked about how Headway really was in each city and meetings. And so we were a little bit of an impasse. Then I turned out he was a Chelsea fan. So we talked about Chelsea for the rest of the lunch. And I got the best Christmas present ever. I bought at the Headway charity. I got a Chelsea shirt with the whole team signing the kit. So that made me a great mom this year to pull out a Chelsea kit for my son. Kudos. So this idea of social work and brain injury, when you were starting this at the university, with all of these, the knowledge that Jane brings to it, what did you find? Did you get some pushback from the administration, or what was the response when you started talking about the need?
I got one or two pushbacks of brain injury is highly specialist. So when people say brain injury, when they hear brain injury, think, oh, this is a highly specialist area of practice. It's not common. So in the UK, social services is divided into like children and families, mental health, adult with learning disabilities, but there's no grouping for people with brain injury. So I did hear, oh, it's highly specialist, or you're trained to as a feeder system straight right into local authority social work. But between the private sector and the government exists the third sector. And like even the research that I'm interested in, that I'm involved in right now, you wouldn't normally know that there's another pathway that you can actually go into, because it's either you're a statutory social worker, you're working with a local authority, but then you go into practice. So people fall through the tracks because there's no specialist service for them. So they're being treated for autism, for instance, or supported with autism, or mental health. But I found something really interesting last week, about 2 weeks ago. There's a young girl who's been diagnosed with autism, and she's been supported with autism. But just talking to someone who works with the Child Brain Injury Trust, we found that actually she has a brain injury from lack of oxygen from birth. But because of the way the UK system is designed, she's only diagnosed with autism, but she's not receiving specialist brain injury care. And this is a young girl who's gone through puberty, the effects on hormones. Katherine, we talked about how brain injury has an effect on the endocrine system and hormones for women and young ladies, but no one has given due consideration to that. And so that's why it's really important that social workers have an understanding. Another interesting fact I found out that it also has an effect on sight and vision, but people don't have that effect or that knowledge. So you're dealing with the periphery. You're looking at mental health issues, behavioral problems, maybe for young people or teenagers, but it might have sustained a brain injury in childhood where it's just manifesting as behavioral problems, and we're not supporting them. So like women, for instance, the effect it has on even your self-esteem as a woman, your ability to parent, look after the family. So we're not providing support that is brain injury specific, but that needs some attention, because like I said, if it's the leading cause of death and disability for people aged 0 to 40 in the UK, of course it needs attention, and it's at a cost of £15 billion per annum. That's cost. So of course I would say it needs attention.
As a social worker, coming to brain injury through my son's brain injury and realizing that I had a master's degree in social work. I had a certain level. My father was the superintendent of the school. So I was used to, going into systems and having people listen to me because that was my experience. That was my privilege. My skin color is white. My English is my first language. And so I had everything going for me. And I just hit barrier after barrier trying to get services for my son. And I remember saying once it was the SATs, it was the college exam courses, which wouldn't give him extra time. I said, if I can't get this for my son, who's got a clearly documented brain injury, how is anybody else without all the privileges that I have stacked up that have been given to me? How is somebody that doesn't have this? I can't figure my way through this, and I knew experts to write the correct letters and I still couldn't get through it. So it's so frustrating. So the social work piece helped me from the perspective of looking at the person within the system and how they interact and starting where the person was. Those were sort of the key features. However, in this country, social workers but I could never jump to actually more social workers coming into the field. And I couldn't get paid in the field because social workers in this country are really discharge planners. They're in the hospital and they move you from the hospital bed. They find you your services in the community. But in the medical system, they're not paid that way. It would be a psychologist or a neuropsychologist doing that particular job. So I had huge frustrations in this country trying to get social workers into the practice. Now, so share what the project that you have going on that hopefully will be a huge success in the UK and then take over the world.
I'm also really excited about the Heads Together project. So it's a group of academics I've got who are leading experts in brain injury research. So I've got Professor Andrew Bateman, Doctors Mark Holloway, Andy Mantell. So if you just Google brain injury social work research, these are the names you would find. And it's a collaborative effort with the London School of Economics, Belfast, Queen's University, Belfast, University of Plymouth, University of Essex, the Brain Injury Social Work Group. I hope I haven't forgotten anyone. So we've all come together to design a curriculum to include brain injury in the curriculum in the UK, so that when social workers come to study, they learn about brain injury, learn So already social workers are carrying out assessments, but now you're going to think and look a bit more and look deeper, ask questions, the right kind of questions. So we carry out mental capacity assessments. But the way the mental capacity assessments are designed, they're designed to ask questions. Are you able to do this? And you say yes. But for people who suffer with what Melody George, the late Melody George refers to as a paradox of the frontal lobe, is that people do well in office type assessments. So can you do this well? Yes, I can. And that's because the assessor, is providing a sort of scaffolding and giving you structures. But if you go to the quotidian daily lives of those people, they can't actually carry out these activities. And that may be due to lack of awareness, personality change, lack of insight. So there's a problem with the executive functioning aspects of the brain, the frontal lobe. But if you don't have the training or that knowledge, you would accept, oh, this person can actually do this, and then you move the case on. But so I would suggest triangulation. So where you're working with other members of the family who would tell you, maybe the wife would say, actually, he can't. But because of the capricious nature of brain injury, the person will insist, and rightly so, that he can do that because there's a complete lack of awareness to his own limitations, or that he might be able to do that, whatever the task is, in the morning, but can't do it in the afternoon. So it's giving that thought to the way we carry out mental capacity assessments, how we carry out assessments generally. And then when you're working with a child with behavioral issues, is it mental health issues? Maybe there's a brain injury in childhood that is manifesting at this stage. And then with women with brain injury, for instance, what impact does it have on the relationship with the husband, with the children, her parenting skills, her ability to care, the social economic impact of brain injury, that a lot of women might have been very independent and have a sense of pride, but suddenly an instant life changes for her. And so if it's a progressive illness that okay, I have this illness and then it will degenerate to the point where in the next 2 years, I won't be able to function. Then you have 2 years to plan for this. But a brain injury can happen in an instant. But suddenly your life changes and you have to grapple with the changes, the sense of pride, your sense of identity and not knowing where you are in the world, loss of income, job losses, all of that, domestic violence, mental health. So we see women in the criminal justice system. I used to work in a mental health hospital. I used to see young girls actually banging their heads. And I used to worry because of the rapid acceleration and deceleration, of the head. And it bothered me, all of that. And so it is that thoughtfulness into the assessment process. How does this affect this person? Are we just looking at the condition in isolation? Some people have migraines and you look at the triggers and how can we help this person to deal with that condition? So is it a quiet place that would help this woman? But how do we provide a quiet place for her if she has to look after her children? Or is our first thought, oh, she's not able to look after the children? So it's a thoughtfulness that I'm hoping that the heads together would bring to social workers and social work managers. Because I did a survey of 22 social workers from newly qualified to over 22 years of experience, and only 2 had some sort of training. And one of those was in the session I led. So that's what I'm really excited about, that thoughtfulness. And I'm hoping that it would have a book at the end of it. And then we'll also look at other, like PINK Concussion, operating on the fringes. It'll also shine a light to the excellent work you're doing, supporting women, the hormonal imbalances, the way our sense of self-esteem and worth, all of that, the isolation, sometimes, I think it was Pauline Boss who talks about ambiguous loss, where the person is physically present, but she's not there. It's not the same person. and how that has an effect on the marital relationship or other spousal relationships. So that's what I'm hoping that Heads Together would bridge that gap in knowledge. That's what I'm really hoping and hopeful that would address.
That's brilliant, Akudo. It sounds like such an interesting project, and I'm so hopeful for the future of social work in the UK, and that actually this will be added to the curriculum is a massive step. And I think that all of these changes come from advocates who are passionate, like yourself and like Jane and like Katherine, everybody who is just passionate about this topic and puts their time into creating these positive changes. That's wonderful. I'm aware we've only got a couple of minutes left. I just wanted to ask you a bit more from the context of women's issues about the domestic violence setting and what the social worker's role is in a home where there is violence in the home, and how you hope your training will help to identify brain injury in women who are survivors of domestic violence and change their outcomes afterwards.
You know, one of the things that came out of COVID was there was a rise in domestic violence. And I'll speak as a Black woman, and culturally also, if you grow up in a culture where you uphold the sanctity of marriage, you want to keep your home together, you want to look after your children, and so there are barriers that women face already in trying to keep the home together, keep the children together. If you have an issue with domestic violence and you call the police, social services might get involved. So people have issues and those are barriers already. And there's a doctor here who raised an important fact that I hadn't thought about. Her name is Chinwe. She's here, and she told me about how, you know, women will go for consultation and come to see the doctor. You have only a 10-minute window to speak to the doctor about your issues. But because of the way we speak, we tend to then go and give a history, want to give a historical context to the issues we face. But then by the time that we've got that 10-minute window, by the time you try to then go into your issues, you've missed that opportunity. So I'm hoping that women would have the opportunity to actually express themselves in a safe place. They'll be able to say, okay, I'm having these issues. The first step might not necessarily be to leave the marriage, because she doesn't have agency to leave the marriage, or she can't take care of the children, all of that. But having a safe space for women to actually express and process her thoughts through all of that, through, do we need counseling? Do we need economic empowerment? How are we going to support the relationship? If she wants to remain in the relationship, how do we support the children in a non-judgmental manner? How do we then support the partner? You know, Carol just talks about unconditional positive regard. So are we going to support who we refer to as a perpetrator? Are there cultural factors or maybe religious factors that people need to walk through? So I think if we then look through thoughtfulness to help people unpick the issues, I'm hoping that with all of this, we're able to then support women with domestic violence and domestic abuse. And it's not just physical abuse, it's also emotional abuse, and helping with self-esteem, because a lot of times women might not express their issues, but it starts internally. That self-worth where it's being damaged, and just helping them to walk through these issues. I'm hoping that we'll be able to address that.
I think absolutely. And the systems perspective of, you know, if there's a house where there's, in say in this situation, does the man have a brain injury which causes him to have a short temper and unable to process stress? So, you know, does that cause, you know, him to be violent with his spouse or his children? And then once they have violence, like how does brain injury flow through an entire family system? You know, an initial cause, or people with brain injury using violence, or maybe just getting caught in the criminal justice system and then spending time in incarceration and getting a brain injury there. And, you know, the cyclical nature of all of this. trauma, because it is a systems perspective. So, I think your approach is so exciting. And it seems to me like a time in the UK where brain injury is actually a hot topic.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's getting, we have the equp that's been to Parliament recently. The different organizations, the Brain Injury Social Work Group, there's a lot of people that are now raising the flag to say, okay, let's actually address this. And it's really important that we do.
Yeah, definitely. We have attention from the politicians, so we need to use that and drive some change. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what do you want to, this is my last question, and then Hope will finish up the interview. And I said we were going to stop early, but I don't want to. So I'm going to change my mind. What do you, besides bringing this education to social workers, and just recently we had an article in the New York Times, and we had a judge write and said in all of his years of granting restraining orders, he never thought of the person, the victim that was asking the restraining order, that they might have brain injury. We had someone running a domestic violence shelter. So, I think education is such the piece. What do you educate the social workers, and, what's the next piece that you want? What do you want for the future? And then I'll turn to Hope.
What do I want? That's a good question. Awareness. I think public awareness. And it's not about each person looking out for, is that a brain injury? But it's compassion also. So Jane has given an example of how difficult it's been for her son to book an appointment with a doctor. So just compassion, understanding that it might be difficult. What we take for granted might be difficult. Someone explained the process of making a cup of tea, the different steps that you take, and the decision making that is involved in making a cup of tea. So it's that awareness and not taking people for granted, and understanding that they're hidden disabilities. So give us some thought into how we support people, how we appreciate the struggles that people have. How can we then, we might not be able to eliminate all the barriers, but what can we do to support people when they say, oh, I need a quiet place, I need a quiet space to be able to process my thoughts. I have all these thoughts going through my head, and I can't handle it. The doctor who has a 10-minute window to speak to someone with a brain injury, who at that point is still trying to process before actually articulating his thoughts. But that's not enough. How is society structured in a way that actually disables people without empowering them? And yet we're supposed to be promoting right of participation, right of self-determination. How are we supporting people? How are we putting up barriers for people, and yet they need just a bit of thoughtfulness when someone says, actually, this form is too long and is humiliating for me to go and fill out this form and go through an assessment, and then a paramedic will look at the person and say, actually, you don't have a brain injury. I know what it is to search for answers, to have a medical condition, and you're searching for answers. I know what it feels like, that uncertainty. But then to now go through that whole process, go for an assessment, and you're told there's nothing wrong with you because you can't articulate your thoughts, because you can't write down what's wrong with you, because you don't even understand. Maybe there's a lack of insight or lack of awareness because of executive functioning problems. So I think my next step is each one supporting the next person, each one supporting each one. I would say each one reaching each one.
Yeah, that's a brilliant answer. And I love these conversations around accessibility and the barriers that we put up as a society, and how we can break them down, both from perspectives of people with these hidden disabilities, with brain injury, and also the cultural perspectives that you talk about, and how actually what we might register as being unusual, or why is this working like this, or why is this woman not prepared to leave this relationship. And you explain it so well in terms of cultural differences and what we need to work on expanding our knowledge of, to be able to support people fully and holistically. coming back to those goals you said at the beginning. So I think everybody is really enjoying the conversation and so many positive comments in the chat. I have another question for you. For you personally, you've got experience as a social worker and now as a teacher and as a researcher. Where do you see yourself going in the future to be able to drive forward change? What roles have you enjoyed and what do you see yourself doing over the next few years?
I think being an advocate, for people, people with brain injury, but being an advocate for the underprivileged. I would like to be that voice in the world that are shouting, let's help this person. Let's personalize our service to help someone else. Like I said, I understand and I know what it is to search for answers, and you're lost in the world, not knowing your place in the world. But to be able to then turn around and help someone else without drawing attention to what my issues are. But I would like to help someone else to say, okay, actually, I kind of know, I might not fully understand, but I kind of, what this person is going through, it kind of resonates as a resonance. And I would like to be that voice in the wilderness saying, okay, let's pay attention to this. And then women supporting women, the work you do with PINK Concussions is incredible. So let's bring more women to the fore. I talked about the work you do with women of color. So I'd like to see women. I know there's a doctor, I think there are about 2 or 3 women here who are, excelling in their field quietly. So I know someone who won an award, and I won't say who she is. My sister won an award. Was it yesterday or today? But quietly in her own little world, little but not so little. But that makes me happy. And so women of color also coming to the fore to say, okay, in this space where I occupy, I'm making a difference. I'm making a positive difference. So I'd like to be that champion behind the scenes, say, okay, go for it. I'm really proud of you. Keep going. So that's where I see myself.
That's fantastic. And I love that. And I love you calling out all those humble women who are moving mountains in their own little worlds. That's great. I really love that. And I think it sounds like you're definitely on the right steps too. It sounds like you're doing that already, really, with the work that you're doing. Putting together this wonderful project and heads together. Yeah, I really hope that it goes well over the next few years. Did you have any sort of concluding thoughts you wanted to wrap up with? Anything else you wanted to say about the project, or anybody else you wanted to shout out or anything?
I want to shout out. I think it's just incredible work that women, we don't pay attention, we don't like to shine a light on the work we do. None of us here, even you, Hope, you would come and say, a man would come here and say, oh, this is who I am and this is what I do. I've delivered maybe a 2 billion project and all of that. But the women like Jane and Chinwe, who is a doctor here, would just say, oh, I just support people. So I think my passion shot is that it's incredible that we're all able to, in one way or the other, support women with brain injury, support each other, be a helping hand. And that's just my final word to say, well done to everyone. It's incredible the work you do. Katherine, every time I speak with Katherine, I go away with notes and like, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. So that's just my last words. Well done, everyone, for being here, for the work you do in silence at great personal costs. Well done.
That's wonderful. It's such a nice closing thought, Akudo. And thank you for the work that you're doing and your advocacy. And I think one thing PINK Concussions teaches me over and over again is that there's just such power in advocacy and in people taking their passions and pursuing them and creating real, genuine change. So that's really wonderful. So yeah, thank you for your work that you're doing. And thank you, Jane and Chinwe and all the other women who are on here doing wonderful work. And I think we're 10 minutes over where we wanted to be. So I think we'll wrap up.
I'm really honored to be here. I'm thankful for this opportunity.
Yeah, it's been a really great conversation. So thanks so much, Akudo.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in. Take care.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.